Hi guys, welcome back. Now we're going to talk more about HTML styles in this episode. Now, CSS styles we have talked a little bit briefly, simply as we have been going through various different tags. Let's explore them in more detail because CSS is something that is very closely tied to HTML, and honestly, you cannot design a web page without CSS. Now, this again is not going to be a complete tutorial on CSS. For that, do follow me and do follow my channel. I will be creating more video tutorials on all of these web development topics from CSS JavaScript. So you will be finding that. And by the time I have created it, you might find the link in the down description below. So do watch those courses for the entire playlist on complete CSS tutorials. For now, let's just discuss the basics of CSS, what CSS is, how we use CSS with HTML. So this is going to be very simple basic tutorial based on the content that is W3 have provided within the HTML course. Okay, so within this we talk about CSS, which stands for cascading style sheet, meaning that we use CSS code to design and style our HTML web pages. That's the basic idea behind it. So whenever we want to use CSS, or whenever we want to design the pages, our web pages, we use CSS for that particular purpose. Remember, we have been talking about that HTML is used for structuring the content, not designing it. There's a major difference. HTML tells us how the content should be structured on your web page, but design basically means giving it aesthetics, giving it beautification, giving it more color and pleasing effects, as we see. So for that we use CSS purely. What exactly is CSS? Well, CSS, you can control the color, font size, text spacing between your elements, how elements are positioned, layout, every single thing that you can do on a web page, we basically control using CSS. HTML is in other words, in my definition, I would say this is a linear structural content. Everything comes in a linear manner. Means there's a heading, then there's a paragraph, then the second paragraph, then there is a tooltip, then there's a third emphasis. So everything comes in linearly. But using CSS, we can design non-linear and beautified content. So for example, this menu is appearing here, this menu comes on the top, this menu comes on the top, everything has a green background, there's a logo here on this corner, there's a sign up page on this corner. All this structural design you see on this page itself is being done through CSS. Okay, from changing the backgrounds to foregrounds to menus, color, everything that we go, the assigning the borders to it, everything is done using CSS. Understand? Capish? Wonderful. So learning CSS is absolutely essential, and it basically goes in hand with HTML. So you cannot use CSS individually, you have to use CSS with HTML. CSS is just like an overlay, an extra layer of design code that is applied on HTML. So you fundamentally need HTML at the bottom, and on the top of it, we have CSS, which creates this beautiful aesthetics. So HTML is there. We will be using HTML, but we use CSS to design our HTML. Okay, so this is how we differentiate HTML for structure, CSS for design. Capish? Let's begin. So the way we use it, basically, there are three different ways: inline CSS, internal CSS, and external CSS. These are three different ways of using CSS. We have been using this inline way of CSS in our previous examples. Okay, by inline means that we embed the CSS with HTML tag as an attribute. Okay, we embed the CSS within our HTML tags as an attribute called style. And as you would have been familiar, if you've been following me, that we have been using style as an attribute and giving CSS properties and values. Okay, that is basically known as inline CSS. The second way is called internal CSS, okay, in which we write the CSS code inside a style tag, usually going inside the head tag. So the head tag, HTML's head tag, inside that we write the style tag. And the third way is we give external CSS, in which we actually write the CSS code completely in a different file. So we create a new file blank and it contains only CSS code, and then we integrate and link that CSS code with our main HTML file using the link tag. Okay, so let's learn about all these three in detail as we go along further. So first, let me briefly go back to inline CSS. What exactly was? So inline CSS basically is used to apply style inside each HTML element. So inside each tag, we have been using this CSS in previous examples. So heading 1, this is an HTML tag. we provide an attribute called style, and then we write this within the inverted quotations the CSS property and its value. This example is in fact is known as inline CSS. Okay, so inline CSS we write in within our content, and we have been doing that. So whenever we use style as an attribute inside an tag, this is considered as an inline CSS. How we use internal CSS, now this is where the little bit different aspect is applied. Internal CSS, it says that is used to define the style of a single HTML page. What does that mean? It means that when you use an internal CSS, the style is actually applied on all of the content of your web page. That way, you can control the design of your HTML web page completely using internal one line of CSS. Okay, so this internal CSS is defined inside the head tag, and we use a style tag for it. How do we do that? Let's jump into it to understand it more better. So if I execute this code, you will find that hey, there is some code here, and this code basically allows us to say there's a document type, heading is there, then we have something called head tag. This head tag is basically where our coding starts in terms of internal CSS. So inside the head tag we give this style tag. This is again a tag for HTML. So because this is a tag, it belongs to HTML. So for using HTML, we are defining that, listen, now I'm going to define CSS. Now this is telling my browser that I am using CSS inside a head tag. Previously, we were using it inside the CSS here, but now we plug the CSS out, put it inside the style tag, not the attribute, the tag. So we say that my entire CSS now code goes inside this. The code is now a little bit different as well. What we have done now here is we have used something called an identifier, which identifies that which tag this CSS belongs to. Because previously, remember, we write style as a here. So now we are specifying and we're telling our browser that, hey, this H1 has this style. So it becomes easy. But because now we are not using this internal inline CSS, we are using this style tag. This tells the browser that this is a CSS code. Now the browser will treat this as a CSS code blank. Okay, so this is just simply as that. But inside it now, once we write the tag, which tag it belongs to, that's the information that's missing. So to satisfy that, we use this body as an identifier, which basically is the tag name. So the identifier is actually the tag name in HTML. So H1 is the tag name, P is the tag name. So whatever tag you want to apply the style to, you just write the tag name, curly brackets this time. Instead of inverted quotations, we use the curly brackets, and then we use the same property and value. Done. Then if I want to apply the style on H1, so instead of using a style attribute internally, I use H1 as a tag and H1 as a selector within the CSS style, curly brackets instead of inverted quotations, and I tell. Then paragraph, and then, so this, what this does means is that now I have used the CSS internally, segregated the code, and this style will be applied. So when we execute it, you see the heading 1 is blue in color. However, there is no style here, but it's blue in color. The paragraph tag is there, it's red in color. And if I want to specify more attributes to it, I say, hell yeah, let's apply more attributes to it. So for example, I can say background dash color, and I can say maybe let's make this yellow. W is missing. So if I run this, BACK spelling mistake. So make sure you don't make any spelling mistakes. If you make spelling mistake, it won't run. Okay. So now what happened? Well, we get a background color. So we specify the styles separately to keep the code simple, to keep the code more readable and understandable. This time, what we have done that we have specified the code separately as a style tag on inside the head tag. This way, our browsers will say, hey, I have a style, no problem. So this is a paragraph, and this paragraph will have this particular style. Capish? Okay. And there's no need to provide any internal CSS here. But here's the key aspect within this thing. What happens if I use a second paragraph? Okay. So if I use a second paragraph, so if I say this, oops, where did that go? Come back here, brother. Don't run away. This is the second paragraph. Okay. Now, as soon as I execute, what should happen? Exactly. This is showing me exactly same style. What happens if I write the third paragraph here? Hello, this is H1. uh, heading 2 backslash h1, and then I write the third paragraph. The third paragraph, okay, gh, and then backslash p. What should happen now? If I run the code, the third paragraph again follows the same style. The heading also follows the same style. Because this time we have provided this heading h1 only once. Every time we now use a heading tag, it will follow the same style. Every time we use a paragraph, we don't need to provide styles separately for each paragraph now. Because we have said, hey, this page uses a style, and when you use a paragraph, this is the style I want for that paragraph. So you specify it once, and every time now you use a paragraph, each of these paragraphs will automatically have this style. That's the key advantage and key takeaway that we need to understand. This means by specifying the style here, I can control the layout of an entire page of all the tags. If I were to do the same thing, I would have to write the style tag with every single attribute and a property for my content. Okay, so in this I have to provide this style tag in this, so I would be repeating code a lot, which is useless, right? I mean, we're just setting certain styles. So instead of repeating the code for every paragraph tag, we gave it as an internal css within the style tag, letting our browsers know that hey, there's a style there, and then telling it that for every paragraph you are supposed to make it red, you make it to yellow, and whatever settings we basically set it. Capiche? It just creates and applies that setting to all of these paragraphs. That's why internal css is so useful. So if you have like 20 paragraphs, you can easily control those style of paragraph by just this one line of code. That's the beauty of css. It allows us to control multiple tags styles using just simple one code. The trick is now what happens if I want this paragraph to be different. That's where we start to use classes and hash. We talk about this in detail when in the css course later on. So for now, this is basically what inline internal css means. Okay, then let's just talk about something called external css. Now, what is exactly an external css and how we use external css? Within external css, we write the entire code in an external file. Here we wrote this style tag and we wrote the CSS code in our head tag. However, if I need to write the CSS externally, this basically means that I don't write here, I delete this entire code, and instead of that, I write a link tag. Okay, so instead of this thing, oops, control Z, come back here, let me click on try it yourself so we can refer that code later on. So instead of writing that code here, now what we have done is that we have just provided a link tag. I will talk about this, but the CSS is actually written in a separate file. Okay, that separate file is completely containing this code. That's the gist of it. Where is that code? Now, again, in this case, our code is within our separate file called style.css. So what we do is we create a new file. We name it style. Again, name can be anything for that matter. The extension needs to be .css. Okay. So for HTML, we talked about it, that every extension has to be .html. For CSS, every extension needs to be .css. So within this, we copy and paste the exact same code without the tag. Remember this tag that we used previously, this belongs to HTML. I talked about it. So this is HTML tag. So instead of this, we just copy this code here, which is CSS code, and we paste it in that file. So body, background color, h1 color, paragraph color, and if I want to update anything here, I write all the codes of paragraph related to this external file, save it as .css. So this becomes one separate file. How do we link it with the main file? So we come to head. Now instead of using the style tag, we use another tag called link. Link tag has multiple different purposes. Basically, in this case, the one we are doing now, let me explain that. In this case, we are saying that, hey, this HTML file is there. There is no style defined within this thing. See, there's no style, but still we see the style attribute. So what we're doing is we're telling the browser that, listen, this HTML file is linked to an external file. That external file is in relation to this is a style sheet. Okay, and the path of that external file is style.css. So href is a hyperreference telling our browser that I'm using this CSS and this CSS file is this one. And this is the path wherever you have saved it. By default, we save it in the same folder where we have saved the HTML file. So now what we do is we save this as a separate file. We save it here, all the CSS code goes inside here, and then we link it with main HTML file. So this is how our external CSS basically works with. This is how we set up our external CSS. So we save the code without the style tag. So because this is with CSS, there's no need of writing the style tag. And then we write the whole code is same, everything else is same. So every time we want to apply a CSS on a particular tag, we give it as a name, body becomes a selector, h1 becomes a selector, paragraph for that tag, bracket start, bracket close. Within the bracket, we write the CSS at property and its value. So instead of writing everything within our single HTML, we wrote it separately. Why there's a need for that? Now this becomes, here is the most powerful feature of CSS. The reason for using external CSS is that using this external CSS, now I can control my entire website that could contain hundreds of web pages. What happens if your web page basically contains not one, not two, not three, but hundreds of web pages, or thousands of web pages? Every web page needs to have a heading which has to have a particular style. Every web page has to have a border. Every page needs a sidebar, the right sidebar, the content area, the examples. See this, if you even use the W3 Schools website as a reference, every button, every menu is consistent throughout the website. How do we do that? We use external CSS. Within my external CSS, I define that every menu item that you see on a web page needs to have green for active web page, and then this dark black for a hover effect. Then there is the menu items, the sidebar, the left bar, the special code needs to have this gray box around it. Then this tip has to have orange box around it. Colors have to have a background feature. Everything that you see is consistent throughout the website because the style has been defined in our single file. Using this single file, I'm able to control hundreds of pages. So this is the major power of it. So for example, tomorrow, if I say, okay, now I want to change the theme of my website, and let's just from green to, let's just make it this kind of blue. If I'm not using external CSS, internal CSS, if I'm using, that would mean that in every single page, I will have to go and change the color. If it's 100 pages, 100 times I have to open every single page and change the color. If this 1000 pages, 1000. For a consistent page website like even W3 Schools, it could have 100,000 pages. Just to change the color of this button here for active from green to blue, I would have to open 100,000 pages and change the color manually. However, and obviously it's a nightmare, you can understand that, right? So however, if I use an external CSS to do that, I just have to go inside my external CSS, change the color from green to blue. That's it. One line, and my entire website color will be changed because entire website will be linked to that one single CSS file. To link it, we use the link tag. We tell the relation. This is a metadata telling our browser that, hey, listen, this is a style sheet that we are using within our web page, and this is the link that we are using. So this becomes our simple way. So we use inline CSS inside the tag. Internal CSS goes in the head tag with the style tag. External CSS basically goes outside. It's an external file and we link it with a link tag. So this becomes same throughout every website. Only thing that we need to provide in every web page would be this tag. So every web page will have a link to this style, and then all styling and attribution of the styles and designing of the web page basically goes in this external file. That's the gist of CSS. Okay, so what styles can we do? We have talked about few major things. So if you understand how we use CSS, now we just have to go forward and understand various different properties and how we use those. So we have talked about the color. So in this case, if I take an example, you'd see that, hey, this is a heading, this is a paragraph. Okay, wonderful. So how do we do that? If I come inside body, you would see this is a simple body color. It has heading 1, it has paragraph 1. There's no styling here, but this looks very nice here. How did that happen? Because we have used something called internal CSS. Because this is a one web page, we can use one internal CSS, no problem lah. Okay, I said okay. So now we say, hey, this heading color needs to be blue, so we color is set. Font family Verdana, so we change the font, and font size needs to be 300% from its original value. So from original value it becomes 300%. If you want to set as a background color, so I can say, hey, background dash col color needs to be, for example, colon, light gray semicolon. If I hit run, it will have a light background color. Paragraph color, we said okay, paragraph, let's just make this also background and the ground. Background color, oh yeah, I still misspelled it. Ground col color, oops, not cooler, col color can be, for example, dark brown. Okay, so if I set this to green, okay, dark brown is not read, dark gray should be there. Yeah, dark gray is there. So we now have a dark gray color. If I want to set the body color, again, what I will be doing is within CSS, anywhere I want, it's not necessarily that I write it top, I can write it at the bottom as well. I can say, hey, listen, the body, for this body color, curly brackets we gave, and I said for body, let me use again background dash cor color to be light gray or light blue blue. If it's available, let me hit run and it becomes light blue. Okay, so now what happens is that we specify the CSS, we specify the selector that I want to change the color of body, give it a bracket, and then provide the CSS style. So background color, font family, all these attributes are there. Similarly, we can give border. We talked about border a little bit, so I can come here, I can say, listen, how about this paragraph is there, but I want to give it a border as well. So we can say border, oops, come on, new line, border, give it a semicolon. I can say it can have, for example, 5 pixels in length, it needs to have solid, and it can be, for example, green in color. I hit run, and now you can see this, we have this border. So what we're doing now is we are providing various different CSS styles. CSS styles are basically different properties which we use to give every design our entire web pages. Okay, so we talked about these things previously as well. So if you've been following along, you should understand that okay, what is border, what is 2 pixels, and everything with that. Similarly, one property we haven't talked about yet, it's going to be detailedly discussed in CSS course. Hopefully in coming days we will come into it, but padding is there. Padding is basically giving certain space to our content. So by default, you can see this is starting right from the border. What if I want to give that, okay, this text should start after some space. So we come inside this here and I can say, let me give a padding. For example, padding right, and this can be 10 pixels. Okay, now if I run it, there should not be any effect, even the border vanished. Why? Because remember, we have been saying that every CSS property needs to have be ending with a semicolon. Why? Because this is one property, this is second property, this is third property. So semicolon indicates that, hey, this property ended, now new property ended. It's more like a full stop in our normal English statements. We use a full stop to mark the end of a statement. In case of programming, we use semicolon to mark the end of a statement or end of a particular function or end of a particular instruction. So this is just one instruction telling our browser that, hey, background color is supposed to be dark gray, capiche, close it. Then border is supposed to be this, but I forgot to give a semicolon. And so it assumed that this code is still continuing, and it did not make any sense. So HTML and CSS are quite nice and humble languages. They don't give any errors, they don't complain a lot. But if there's any issue, they might not give output as we expect. Okay, so do keep things in mind. So I just gave a semicolon here. Now everything should be okay, and we can have padding, 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 right? Okay, and then we can say padding right 10 pixels. It should be there, right? Oh, okay, this will be left, sorry, not right, left. Yeah, so we can say 10 pixels. Right is actually from this side. Okay, so this is left, this is right, top and bottom. So if I sell 10 pixels, I said I don't see many effect. How about I set it to 50? So if I see 50 pixels, now means that there's a space, padding or gap of 50 pixels, a tab of 50 pixels by default. If I have a big line, I can give it in terms of right as well. So if I come here and I can say this is a big line with some more uh, garbage text, blah 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 blah. Okay, so if I run it, now you see it has multiple line, but now I want to give space from here as well. So this is where we will say, hey, listen, let me write padding dash right and colon and 50 pixels from right as well. So we want this to make sure that there's a 50 pixels from left and 50 pixels from the border as well. If I hit run, and now you can see there's a 50 pixel gap. If you want it to be more, for example 150, it's 150 gap in the pixels here as well, depending on how you are designing your web page. Most commonly you try to follow the same pattern at the both ends, and this is how it should appear. Wonderful. So padding is basically is used to give more space after the component has started. If you want to give space before the component started, see this starting at the border. So if I say, hey, this heading needs to start not here, a little bit offwards. So we use a property called margin. This is one thing. Again, something discussed in detail in CSS course. But we can say, listen, I want to give a margin, and from all around the border, let me give 30 pixel margin for this component. Hit run. So now you see there's a space here, space here, space here. This will mean that there's a margin space occurring from the component as it goes. You can increase this margin to, for example, 50. So now you see there's more space all around the component. The components are being pushed down because we have used margin as a whole word. This means left, right, top, bottom, from all four sides 50 pixels have been given as a space. So if I set it to 10, now notice there will be jump in this alignment like that, because now there's only 10 pixel of space from left, 10 from right, 10 from left or top and bottom and so on. So there's a less space occurring here. Similarly, margin can be allocated in terms of its left and right as well. So I can say, hey, margin left can be 20 pixels. Okay, so 20 px semicolon. So now in paragraph I said margin left. This means for paragraph I only want a margin to start from this side. If I hit run, so there's only 10 pixels gap here, and then there's a border, and then padding starts inside the border, so there's a 50 pixel gap inside the border. So these are few different CSS properties, again talked much detailed in complete CSS course, so do follow along for that. So margin is there basically, which allows us to control that particular margin. So we have used the link to external CSS. We can use the CSS provided by W3Schools as well. So CSS links can be done from your website that you are using. So this is my website. W3Schools has its own style sheet, and I can use that. So in H reference, I can refer to that particular website that, hey, use an online CSS. We typically do this for Bootstrap. So I don't, Bootstrap is like a CSS framework. It's already designed and defined and designated. We don't temper with it. We just use its predefined styles and components for every single thing. So if you want to use the same style as W3 Schools website, use these border areas and everything, you can just refer to this here and know the styles and apply. Khalas. So this is basically a very quick intro of what CSS allows us to do in terms of external. So we talked about CSS as the style attribute, the style tag, the link tag, the head tag, which allows us to store the style tag, and few of the color properties. Okay, so I hope you understand what CSS is and how we can use CSS to design our web page components. Okay, again, this was just a very quick and brief tutorial, brief session of CSS within our HTML course. For detailed instruction of step by step about CSS, do follow along, and I will be uploading CSS complete course very shortly as well. Okay, thank you for till now.